Hey everybody, it's Erik, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Venture Stories by Village Global. I'm here today with two very special guests. Special co-host Anuj Abrol. Anuj is Justin Khan's chief of staff, which is, you must be living the dream. And then I may have buried the lead, but we're here with Justin Khan. Guys, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
How are you?
Justin, how would you like people to describe you?
Well, I used to spend a lot of time thinking about that. I used to think how am I going to be remembered and thought about, and I wanted to optimize the way people thought about me in my Wikipedia page, but I don't really care anymore. I've realized however you think of me today, you think, oh, that guy's been an entrepreneur, he's had some success, maybe he was lucky, maybe you think I'm really smart. It doesn't matter. In 10, 20, 30, 50 years, it'll fade away and you probably won't remember me at all. So that's okay. That's just part of life. It doesn't really matter that much.
I feel like you're on some Jim Carrey, like wisdom. Have you followed Jim Carrey's
Is Jim Carrey, has he turned from comedian to guru?
Yes.
Comedic guru.
I'm trying to think of other analogies, but I feel like you're really on a wisdom kick.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot more recently about what's really important in my life, and I think there's some probably generally applicable lessons there, but it's been a good journey for me so far. Still on it.
Justin Khan, serial entrepreneur, investor, co-founder, CEO of Atrium, of which we were lucky to be investors. Let's get back to this wisdom kick. Any foundational texts, or what is sort of the moment where you started to think a lot more about this type of stuff?
Well, okay, I'll back up. So started a bunch of companies. People might know about them. Most of them failed.
Justin TV,
Exact. And then one of them that worked, it's called Twitch. And we ended up selling that to Amazon 2014. And then I was a partner at Y Combinator, where we met for a couple of years investing in startups. And then more recently, about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years now, I started a company called Atrium, which is effectively a verticalized full stack tech enabled law firm for startups. And through the process of starting Atrium, it's been a very tumultuous rocket ship, which, many startups are, ups and downs, oftentimes feels like there's more downs than ups, very stressful. I thought this time, well, surely I have mastered the game of starting startups, but there's always something new to learn. So I found it very stressful. About a year ago, I was like, oh my God, the stress is really just as bad as it ever was, as much of a roller coaster as there ever was in any of the other startups. And I was looking for a way to deal with that inside, myself. And so I really invested in thinking about what are the ways that I can build practices. Actually, that sounds a little more intentional than it was. I was desperately grasping on it. It was like I was in a ocean and after a shipwreck, and I was like looking for a piece of wood to hold on to, any sort of practice that would enable me to add a little bit more calm into my life. And so that's kind of how I started thinking about this, and eventually built out doing a set of practices. We don't need to, I've talked about them before. We don't need to go too deep into them, but things like meditation and being more intentional about trying to remove my attachments to outcomes. And I started doing those things regularly. And in the last 6 months, it's really worked for me. And, it's not something necessarily that works 100% for everybody, but for me at this place in my life, I found it very important. And so that's what I started doing. And I like talking about it because, I've been through a lot of ups and downs, but a lot of things that externally people would say, man, that guy's very successful. I sold a company for $1 billion, whatever. But I've got to tell you that there's nothing that's affected my baseline happiness and well-being in a lasting way. No amount of success has ever delivered that to me, even though you think it will, right? You think, oh, if I just get over this next milestone, I'll feel good. But that never works. It's never worked for me anyways. And I've never heard of it actually working in a sustainable long-term way for anyone. And this other stuff, this kind of turning inside and working on myself has actually delivered a vast improvement to my own baselines. And that's why I'm so excited to talk about it with other people, because it is something that I feel like works.
Well, it's this interesting balance because you are pursuing that and everything we've been talking about. At the same time, you're also building this rocket ship company, going from zero to how many employees at Atrium?
Well, Atrium is 150 people now.
0 to 150 in a year, 2 years. Why do that as well? Because if you wanted much more calm and peace of mind, you would not have a company, right? Like, what are you motivated by? Because you don't have to work anymore. You've already been successful. Why build Atrium? Why build a big company at all?
I think that's a good question. Why do anything? Because everything is kind of pointless and will eventually fade away. But I think human beings are wired to want to build stuff, want to be creative, have creative outlets, build their environment, whether it's organizationally or other ways. And I think that's part of kind of playing the human game, is that you're wired to do things, and that's not bad. I think that it's you just need to get perspective and maintain perspective, and remember that even if you are successful at building something, it's not going to achieve any sort of long-term lasting outcome for you. And don't be too emotionally attached to it either way. I do think that I still continue to learn things building Atrium. That's the reason I started another company. It wasn't for really an economic outcome, because I think the marginal utility of greater and greater financial rewards is pretty low for people. The reason I wanted to build Atrium was because I felt like it was a great vehicle. Startups in general are a great vehicle for your own personal growth and development, to learn new skills, learn what it's like to lead bigger organizations, see if you can do it, if you deserve to at all. That's not a foregone conclusion. So I felt that building a startup was a great way to put myself into that maximal learning situation, which it has done. And so that's another really great reason for me to want to start a startup, I think.
And another piece I know you talked to me about a lot was mentorship, and how startups were a vehicle for that too.
Yeah, definitely. I think that building an organization, let me start from the beginning. One of the things I'm most proud of in my career is not having successful companies, but it's kind of the people who I've worked with and invested in. I don't mean just invested in like financially, but invested my time into and building a relationship with, who have gone on to build and do really great things. And selfishly, I think there's a set of them out there who are thinking, well, thank God for that guy, right? And they feel like they've really learned something from me. And that's a very unique and valuable feeling, of great sense of pride and accomplishment. And so I think, another reason to start Atrium is really to build that type of vehicle where I feel like I can mentor people who are in our organization and help them on their careers to hopefully do excellent things inside our company and then outside as well.
Yeah. And did you feel that, because you were playing with different fund ideas, you were playing with an incubator, 0F, did you feel that a company was the best way for you to do that?
Yeah, I kind of iterated through all the ideas. So I was thinking, should I start a venture fund? But it didn't feel like very hands-on for me. I had just come from running a venture fund or being a partner at one. And then I thought about, should I incubate 5 companies and just become the chairman of each one and find someone.
You did that with one, Alto?
Yeah, exactly. I worked with these guys, this company called Alto. It's a full stack pharmacy, kind of like the Atrium for pharmacy. And it's a company doing pretty well. Raised about $75 million so far. It's about 200 people. I met the co-founders, Matt, Jamie, and Vlad, because they wanted to work on a startup, and they were used to work for a friend of mine. And they started working on a startup out of my house. I had this home office that I, just let other people use because I liked new ideas and I liked hearing about new ideas. This was back in 2015. And so I guess it's almost been four years now. These guys started this company. That was kind of a prescription delivery company in pharmacy. And I had helped them kind of in the initial setup phase, hiring a few of their early key employees and raising capital and really working through the strategic questions. And they've gone on to do pretty well. So I was like, maybe I should just do that 4 more times or 5 times concurrently. But, I felt like whenever you do that, you don't have to solve the problems yourself. You can let the other founders are really more on the hook for solving the day-to-day problems of the company. And I felt like, it wouldn't be as hands-on as I wanted. So ultimately I went all the way back to, full circle to let's start a company.
And do you see yourself as having life goals or sort of bucket list of accomplishments, or is that incompatible with the view of, being present and all that fades away eventually?
I think actually if you do invest in being present, it does fade away. Having a goal, I think the goals become more like a scorecard or something like that, but it doesn't really, you don't have this burning attachment between your ego and your goals. So yeah, I have goals in terms of Atrium's impact and, how big of a company I think it can be. And I'm very invested in getting there actually, but I wouldn't say that it's the most important thing.
Right. And for you personally, 20 years from now, when Atrium has been an immense success, do you say, oh, I'm just going to do that again with something else? And I just going to be a politician. I don't like, how do you think about?
Well, I think having new experiences and trying new experiences is pretty great, a great vehicle for learning. Like I said, I really like to learn new things about new industries. And so, there may be 20 years from now, if Atrium is fortunate enough to be a great success, I probably would be trying to do something interesting or learn about something. I think a company can be a vehicle for your continual learning, not just, 1, 2, 3 years in, but 10, 15, 20 years in. Look at great companies like Amazon and Facebook.
I should have said 30 years or 40 years from now, but yeah.
Yeah.
Whenever the Atrium journey ends. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think, and that's kind of the stage I would like to get to, because I do think that there's so much to learn from being able to have those kinds of opportunities. And if you ever get the chance to lead a company that's, 10, 20 years in, that's successful and a large company, I think that's a huge blessing, and there's so many things you can learn from that experience.
Yeah. And Anuj, what would you say is Justin's superpower, having worked with him so closely, and what inspired you to join him in the first place?
His superpower, I think, being able to think in frameworks. Startups are full of ambiguous problems, and be able to take that and break that down on to what to prioritize. And what led me to join him was a unique dual role. I was previously in management consulting, and naturally you're more risk averse. And with Justin, it was an unclear role initially. I wasn't 100% sure how involved I'd be with Atrium, but you sort of just jump along for the ride. I think Mark Andreessen had this post: when someone like famous comes calling, they're not going to call you back if you say no.
Right. What's one or two unique frameworks that you've learned from Justin?
I've learned a lot of tactical things around fundraising, which we might get into later, but then also even anyone's responsibilities, right? You should be able to break them down in a very short list and always think through them.
Yeah. We'll get to that in a bit. So Justin, we're getting to Atrium. As you were thinking about which company to start, you've told the story of how you've been an involuntary user of the legal system for quite some time. When you were doing through the idea maze of what you could start, did you say, hey, I, Justin, have built up this immense audience and goodwill and this unfair advantage around helping startups. Should I build a company where startups are the customers and then evaluate different companies from there? Or what company did you almost start that wasn't Atrium?
Well, actually, there wasn't really any company any other company. I think that I actually tried to figure out, this is the most research I've ever done on a startup idea ever with Atrium, and I tried to figure out reasons not to build it, actually. And really it came from my observation, a happenstance meeting I had with a partner at a law firm. And I was asking her, why do you run your business in this way? You serve all these technology companies, the biggest technology companies in the world, but you don't really use very much tech yourself. And I came up with a set of hypotheses on why the industry was broken. And ultimately, I was trying to disprove. I spent the next couple of months talking to all sorts of people, potential customers, investors, other, people at law firms. And I tried to think of reasons and come up with reasons why this was not a good idea. And to be honest, I really couldn't come up with any. And I felt like it was such a big market that it was something that I really wanted to try to tackle. Plus, I'd been the customer and I felt like I knew what customers really wanted. And then on top of that, it's like you said, I had built up this goodwill in the startup ecosystem. So that was a natural place to start with, doing corporate transactional work for startup customers.
Totally. So you have this unfair advantage in brand, in relationships, but how have you thought about the law, sort of redesigning the law firm from scratch, and how do you see the law firm evolving in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of incentives and organizational DNA things that you can do differently. And that's the experiment of Atrium. So at a traditional law firm, it's run very much like a partnership. These companies are very old. They're 50 or even 100 years old. They're ships that move very slowly, that grow very slowly, and do not change very often. And all the partners have their own autonomy, which can be good in a lot of ways. But in some ways, if you find a best practice for how to do something, it doesn't necessarily roll out to the rest of the partnership and to the ways that everyone does things. At the same time, it's very much the case that, training and mentorship, how do you train paralegals and new attorneys, and how do you mentor them and hold them accountable? That's all done in a very ad hoc way on a partner by partner basis. There's no real, kind of corporate DNA within law firms around training. And so I felt like there were some things that you could do if you changed the culture and incentives. So on the incentive side, it's things like, let's move things to quote upfront pricing and fixed subscription pricing, because that's going to give us an incentive to figure out ways through technology or operational best practices to lower cost over time, so that we're incentivized to improve things over time, as opposed to traditional firms, which are all on hourly billing models, where you have a incentive to not improve over time. And the other side is like, creating a environment that's more like a startup, a company that's more like a startup, where there's more incentive to grow the enterprise value of it over time, as opposed to law firms that kind of take money off the table, as much money off the table every year as possible. So there's very little incentive for reinvestment. On the company culture side, I think there's a huge amount there. Law firms are run by partners, and it's great if you are a partner, but there's very little agency for anyone who's not a partner there. And all the partners are attorneys. So any sort of functional group, whether it's, God forbid, engineering, law firms don't really have engineering, but, accounts, operations, any of that stuff, the decisions are not really made by the functional people. So it's very hard to recruit like the best in class functional people. And that's something we wanted to change. Another aspect was, the culture is really having a defined mission and company values. So law firms do not do that really, but that will sound very familiar to startup companies. So those are, and some of the aspects, really just making sure that we empower people throughout the organization, not just at the top of the organization. One of the things that I remember distinctly from the research period of Atrium was talking to attorneys, and these are partners, senior partners at firms, and they're like, well, people who are 30, 35, do not, attorneys who are, like basically 2, 3, 4, or even like 5 or 6 years in, don't have enough experience yet to really know what they're doing, basically, or know how to do things without supervision, or ultimately make decisions about the way work is done. And I've thought back to my own experience, and I thought, when I was 26 years old, I was running a multi-million-dollar P&L at my own startup, and you just kind of learn by doing. And so providing opportunities to younger people who are hungry and entrepreneurial and want to see change in this industry is something that I think we can do that most others are not doing right now.
And just to zoom out, we were talking earlier that, 20 years from now, you could be, CEO of Atrium still in the way that Amazon or Facebook, have been going for multi-decades with the same CEO. What would that world look like in terms of what does Atrium look like? What's the biggest version of the company?
Yeah. So I think that there's a huge version of the company out there. I think it's going to take a long, long time to get there. We may never get there. I oftentimes feel like talking about multi-decade journeys. You should be so lucky. I don't know if we'll ever get there. I hope we do, and that's my goal. But I don't know, and I don't want to be so presumptuous to say, oh, this is what's going to happen. But I do think that if you think about enterprises out there, they consume a massive amount of legal services, hundreds of billions of dollars of legal. And what's called legal is actually kind of an agglomeration of all of these different practice areas, from everything from corporate transactional to IP to litigation to all these different types of services. One of my friends I remember she was at a lawyer who just did law for airplane leases. Just airplane leases, for companies buying and selling aircraft. And there's a huge amount of tax, jurisdictional things, and it's very complicated, but it's just like it's something you would think is like a small subsection, right? And so what I think Atrium can do is combine, traditionally all of these different practices of law only compete on one axis, subject matter expertise. So basically, if you are a, aircraft leasing lawyer or aircraft transaction lawyer, you're going to build your reputation over a decade or multiple decades because of your expertise. And that's how you get a reputation. And eventually your clients will refer other clients, et cetera. I think the core premise of Atrium is, can you combine that subject matter expertise with a few other things? operational best practices, a technology platform, and a great sales and marketing go-to-market function, and build something that is uniquely positioned in the market to deliver services in a better, more efficient way that improves over time. And then can we apply that strategy and that like philosophy to all the different practice areas of law? And eventually maybe all the other professional business functions that serve enterprises and companies. And I think that's the biggest version of Atrium. I really think of Atrium like I think of Amazon, which is if you think of Amazon, it's not just one company. It's really like a conglomerate of thousands of companies, all of the different retail categories, all the way to, different software services that they sell through AWS, and even Twitch and Audible and Kindle and Echo and Alexa, and all these different things are run like their own small businesses, not small even, but, their own large businesses. And I think that what Amazon is really, it's a brand. It's a set of leadership principles. It's a management philosophy, a way of serving the customer. And they apply that philosophy across all of these different businesses. And I think ultimately for Atrium to live up to its potential and be successful, we have to do the same type of thing, which is really empowering leaders in our company to build these professional businesses in a different way.
Does that mean that the Atrium for X will be Atrium in the same way that the Uber for X, Uber?
It's hard to say. I think that when I remember Brian Chesky from Airbnb saying that the Airbnb of boats was going to be Airbnb. Turns out there's not really any Airbnb of boats, but, sometimes it's very easy to make ambitious conjectures in day one, which may or may not play out. So, I think that anyone who's trying to start the Atrium of X, and there's many right now, they should just go do it. I'm not necessarily going to, become a tax preparer tomorrow or anything like that.
What do you recommend in these Atrium for X business models? What should entrepreneurs have as a core part of their thesis?
I think there's probably a lot more nuance than people think. There's probably not like the best sweeping rules. I think oftentimes earlier in the cycle for, X for Y, everybody is thinks they can apply exactly the same things. One company that's being successful can to the others. And I think that oftentimes that proves out not to be the case, because the dynamics of this, whatever marketplace or industry are, often very specific to that industry. I think in general, when you're starting one of these companies, you want to have a pretty broad strategic understanding of how that industry works, probably some deep technical understanding of that industry from hopefully a co-founder who's been in it. And you want to have the right balance between not indexing too much in how the experts do it in that industry, but probably not having to relearn every industry lesson. Oftentimes I think tech people want to come into an industry and say, well, these people don't know shit. I'm gonna just, do it from first principles entirely. I appreciate the gumption and I've had a healthy dose of that, but I do think that you want to often take the best of what's actually working.
Right. But sometimes that works, right?
Just throw out everything.
Or beginner's mind, I guess. I
think it's very important to have a beginner's mind, definitely. But I think that it's also important to actually listen to the people in the industry and really hear beyond what they're saying, right? There are sometimes companies don't listen enough, I think, and end up reinventing a lot of the same things that already existed.
Yeah. I always thought there should be sort of a Wikipedia of here are all the companies in space that have tried it. Here's what they learned from it.
Yeah.
They failed.
That would be a really good resource.
Yeah.
That would be a very good
build
resource.
Build that for the startup community, and people who've built businesses in the space should add to it. Let's say we were all running a fund and it was the Atrium for X fund. What might our thesis be, or our request for startups, or what would we be really excited? Where do we think that model will work well, and where do we think it won't work well?
Yeah. So I think it works best for industries that have relatively high margins and high dollar revenues. I think that's number one. So I started this company called Exec, and it was in the space of HomeJoy and Handy. And that was very tough to make work because the dollar revenues and margin were really low in that space. And when you have a physical workforce that's doing the work, fundamentally, it's very hard for you to make your margins work and support a kind of expensive technical staff and infrastructure if there isn't already a lot of fat in the business. And I think it's also really important to identify a few core things that the incumbent customers really hate about the business in the industry, like things that they wish that would improve, where there's structural reasons why the industry is not actually solving those problems. There's there's an incentive alignment problem, or a new entrant can come in and be counterpositioned against the incumbents. I think, people don't think enough about that.
Yeah.
Two other things I would add. Andreessen Horowitz recently had this post about managed marketplaces, and they talk a lot about the supply. You're making restricted supply more accessible. So that's one. And then two, I think the Roboy thesis is pretty good here. Yeah. Highly fragmented, so there's no consolidated power you're really running up against, and a low NPS where people are more willing to try something out.
Yeah, totally. That's great. How would you think about one idea I'm exploring is like Atrium for recruiting in some fashion? I don't know which segment of the recruiting stack to focus on, but what would you advise?
Yeah, so there's companies are kind of eating around the edges of that. TripleByte is a great example, right? TripleByte started by Harj Tagger, who's was a partner at Y Combinator, and then two former Justin TV employees actually, who went on to start a company called SocialCam. So they said technical recruiting is done in a very broken way, where people look at resumes primarily, which are not a very good indicator of technical competence. And they felt like there should be primarily an aptitude test and then a matching program based on, kind of the type of person that you need. They started really with engineers, but I actually think that process would work for other skill sets and positions as well. And they kind of rethought the entire interview process with this, beginner's mind, which I think was pretty interesting. And if you think about the reason, one of the ways, if we go back to what I was saying, one of the ways that they're, kind of doing something differently that the incumbents are not incentivized to do, well, if using contingent recruiters outside of your company generally, one of the things they want to do is send you as many candidates as possible. Right. And they're incentivized to waste your time as the interviewer, with people who aren't necessarily that good of a fit, because there's no cost to them to do that. With TripleByte, they actually limit the number of companies they send a candidate to, because they want to create one of their core metrics is creating a high matching percentage, right? Like a high interview to offer percentage. And because they feel like they can optimize the, match of a candidate and a company very well, it's actually becomes a negative experience if their, candidates are sent to too many companies, and because there's like less acceptances at the back end, right? And so they kind of flip the incentive structure in a way. And I think that's really important.
Right. Starting to see a lot of these sort of businesses that are like COO in a box, CMO in a box, accounting in a box, or CFO in a box rather. Do you think that there will be sort of a roll up, almost like a McKinsey for startups that does all of these things, or is that Atrium eventually? Or
yeah, so I think that consulting is an interesting one, because startups don't buy consulting services generally, right? They don't buy very many consulting services. So I think the McKinsey or Atrium of McKinsey would probably target enterprise customers. I've heard of a few things. I can't remember what it's called, but there's one that does verticalized, like kind of piecemeal work. Actually, there's a couple. There's one called Consys that was a YC company that was also doing like piecemeal work that consult, like things like PowerPoints and stuff like that. They have it in a way that it's kind of like this virtualized workforce that's, freelancer workforce behind the scenes that's abstracted away with project managers. So I think that is happening actually. Yeah.
I want to transition a little bit. One of the things you said in a recent YC talk is that there are startups that fail because of bad management and startups that succeed but still have bad management.
I've said it consistently throughout my my time at YC. Yeah.
And so what exactly separates bad managers from good managers, or what are the most common misconceptions?
Well, I think the problem in Silicon Valley generally, this probably happens all over every industry, but I see it most here because this is the industry I'm in, is that you have a lot of young people who start companies, which is great, and they get something off the ground and they find product market fit, and then they get capital for it, their company, and they do all of those things having relatively little management experience often, and they do them and they're successful not because of their management. Right? They're successful because they were a really good engineer or product person who invented this thing, and they get to a certain stage and they get this opportunity to manage a company with a lot of people and have capital because of their, finding product market fit, right? Or their core skills, like maybe it was engineering, maybe it was sales, whatever. And then it turns out, most management is a skill that you learn by getting, learning by doing and by getting coached and getting your 10,000 hours in. And, very few people are just natural, amazing managers. And so, of course, these people are like not good managers, right? Because they weren't selected from a pool for being good managers, right? So that can manifest itself in many different ways. It can from the like kind of mundane, like you aren't doing the basic things like one-on-ones or helping people develop the skills they want, or even understanding what your employees want to develop in and helping them achieve their goals, all the way through, you're not delegating well, you're not setting goals well because you're not used to doing those things.
If you had to boil down your startup, crash course in management to just say 5 minutes, what are the most important principles or lessons that you would impart?
Yeah, the number one thing is what got you here won't get you there, right? You need to learn to delegate. That's true for almost everybody. Most people become a manager because they were really strong IC. When you're really strong IC, you get a reputation for being really strong IC because you do things, whatever it takes, yourself. You're just willing to jump in there and do it yourself. Well, it turns out that's not a way to build a scalable, well-functioning team. It's to do everything yourself. So at a certain point, when you start managing a team, you need to start delegating and holding people accountable that in a way that's empowering, right? Not just like, cracking the whip or like, I think it's really important to kind of realize that you need to take a step back and delegate and really figure out how to empower other people to do the work. That's like number one, basics. Number two is just really looking up all the best practices and starting to implement those. That is things like one-on-one goal setting, performance reviews, all the basic stuff. I'm not the world's best manager either. I'm not an expert at that. You can read about it all online. There's lots of books. That's probably the second thing that's important. And, I think the third thing that's probably an important realization I would say to people is, maybe this should be number 0 actually, is that just, it's all about the team you build. People are the most important thing. People don't change that much, especially when they don't want to. And so, really finding the right people from the outset is probably the number one thing you can do to be successful as a leader of a team, whether it's, a small team or a large team. And so really spending the time to invest in finding those right people and empowering them is incredibly important.
How has that evaluation criteria for you changed over time with those executives that you do delegate to?
Yeah. So I think in terms of evaluating people, that's a really good question. I think one of the things I didn't realize even through the beginning of Atrium as much was that there's a certain type of people that I like to work with, and everybody's different, right? Everybody has different types of people they like to work with. And it's not really a matter of right or wrong or who's like the right type of person to hire. It's more a matter of fit with you. And so, for example, for me, the type of people I really want to work with are people who are very much like take ownership and responsibility, don't want me to help them draft the plan or whatever, but really want me to like provide my input at a very strategic level. They have a high degree of ownership. This is the opportunity to own things wholly is like a great opportunity for them. Very low ego, kind of willing to do whatever it takes. And they really see my input as like on the strategic level as a coach and maybe complementary skill sets, right? So some of the things that, I'm good at, I can help them with. Things like I'm good at sales, I'm good at recruiting, basically telling a narrative. So that's something that I can help with. And the things I'm willing to trade off, right, are, you don't have to be the person who comes up with all the ideas yourself, right? Like the most creative person. I'm willing to trade off experience, right? Like definitely willing to take flyers on like kind of high potential young people because, you can't have everything, right? Like, and so I think that at the outset, I did not really realize as much, like I didn't have a specific archetype of person that I knew I worked best with. And now I've kind of identified that.
Yeah. So continuing as a company building theme, let's talk about fundraising. And you came out the gate and raised $10 million?
That's right, $10.5 million.
And you could have bootstrapped yourself. How do you think about sort of lean startup versus fat startup versus what was your philosophy there?
Well, in this case, my goal was really to get to the place where I was learning very fast. And one of the reasons I liked Atrium itself and these verticalized startups is because there's product market fit in a way, which is to say that every founder in Silicon Valley is going to pay for legal services one way or another. Legal services are something that you're going to have to use it's a tax on every corporate transaction in America of any note. And so, I felt like it would be relatively straightforward to start getting some customers and really doing customer development and understanding how to make things better. And I had a good picture of how to make things better already in my mind. And so as opposed to, let's say, a social app where, you kind of play around with ideas and you roll it out there and see if it works, and you've kind of been there and experimented, and like 9 times out of 10, it doesn't work. So you're in this like small team iteration on an idea for a very long time, for an indefinite amount of time. And I wanted to not be in that space, right? And I wanted to be in a place where, I felt like as a second time, third time founder, fourth time founder, whatever it is, I wanted to really take not market risk, but execution risk, right? And so that's why I kind of picked this idea. And then once we had the idea, I was like, well, I know that as opposed to most startups, in this startup, it's kind of like, I know if I build it, or I have a very good sense that if I build it, they will come. So I wanted to raise enough money to support a team that I felt like could build a very good experience.
Is there a different kind of business where you would more recommend lean startup?
Definitely. If you're building like a social app, for example,
like Whale.
If you're building Whale, right? Whale, which is like a social video Q&A app, that's an app that you just need 4 guys in a room to build. And, it might work, it might not work, but you can do that on very little capital. If you're building a, cash flow business, there's a lot of like these direct to consumer businesses that are generating cash flow from day one. They don't need to raise that much money. Don't raise the money if you don't have to, definitely.
Yeah. And so talk about how you architected that seed fundraise, because I remember getting the call and saying, Erik, I want you in. It was one of the last people, but I'm
very thankful for your support.
Of course, yeah, very large check.
No, but that's not the important part. I think that it's great to be part of the community of startups. One of the things I wanted to optimize for was having people around the table who were very helpful, and you've always been there for us. So I appreciate that.
I like it. It's great to be involved. Talk about how you architected that round, because you have a lot of stakeholders in that round. You're very strategic about how you put that round together. And I get that part. I'm mostly interested in how you picked your lead and how you thought about it from.
Yeah. Well, I think that the lead in a way, picked me in that, I had this idea and I was vetting it. So I was talking to a lot of investors and friends, and I was like, would this work? Poke holes in it. And I remember talking to Nico, someone I had known through YC, Nico Benatzis at General Catalyst. And I was telling him, this is in 2017, I was telling him about the startup idea, and we spent, it was a 45-minute conversation scheduled on Saturday. He came to meet me at 4 Barrel in the Mission. But we ended up walking around for a couple hours talking about it. He was very excited about it. And he was like, come in for a partner meeting on Monday. So I came in, boom, they gave me a term sheet, and that was very convincing that I was like, oh, I guess it really is a real thing. So I had talked to a few more people who I really respect in the industry, but ultimately, these guys kind of gave me everything I wanted, and they were very excited about it. I think General Catalyst has been very interested in these verticalized full stack businesses. And so, then I wanted to fill the round with as many people as I felt like could be helpful, as possible. So we raised money from 90 other, investors, prominent angels and CEOs and seed funds and also venture funds in Silicon Valley.
Was somebody strategic to 10 versus 5 versus 15 or 20, or how did you come up to that number?
10 million was basically double what I felt like I needed to build this. We had a plan, and it was like, spend 5 to get to a certain level. And so it was kind of like, oh, this is a good buffer. But, a lot of what we were doing with this early round startup was, in terms of fundraising, it's kind of like the ninja move. You can often, at YC, we'd always say you could cut your own head off. Don't try the ninja moves, because you can cut your own head off. And, I definitely don't necessarily recommend to most startups that they go and try to raise from 90 investors. I think it can actually be a giant pain in the ass. For us, there was a reason to do it, because we really wanted to be accepted into the Silicon Valley community and mind space. And so we felt it was important from a branding perspective.
This time around, so you've written guides on how to raise a seed round, Series A. We raised a Series B in this past summer. What are your main learnings from doing this past round compared to previous ones?
So in this past round, which led by Andrew Chen and Mark Andreessen at Andreessen, it's very similar to actually a Series A in a lot of ways. You have to go
But for you, the Series A was pre-data, right? Or was there?
Yeah, it was pre-data.
More vision?
It was a deck.
Whereas the
It was a
Series B
deck. Here, we had a bunch of milestones. So the first thing we did was like the pre-work. We had a bunch of milestones we wanted to hit as proof points. So in the 6 months leading up to our latest round, we spent a lot of time executing against those milestones. And I think we did a pretty good job of it. Those are things like product proof points and, revenue and stuff, things like that. And then that was the hard work, really. And then after that, we did a lot of work on how do we present this narrative, built a funnel of investors, went through the funnel, did the whole process. And it was a normal kind of process. And luckily, we found a partner who really believed in us. And Andrew was a seed investor in us. And so, he believed in us since the beginning. And I've always had a tremendous amount of respect for Andreesen Horowitz. And so it was good to find a good partner there. We took some of those learnings that we had from our process, and we've also helped. I think Atrium itself has done, it's probably 70, 80 price rounds now in the last year and a half, something like that. And we've seen a lot of dynamics around how do you build a successful fundraising process. So we took some of those and we turned them into this program we call Fundraising Concierge, which really helps startups quarterback their fundraising process for Series A, Series Bs. I think there is really a playbook that, if you, assuming you do the pre-work to actually have a good company, if you have a good company, an investable company, if you just run this playbook, it's going to maximize your probability of success. And it really is a science. It's like enterprise sales. I think when people outside of who have not done sales before, I think about sales, it seems more of an art. But I think if you go inside and do a deep dive into anyone who's running enterprise sales, it's actually quite a bit of a science. And that's always surprising to people, I think.
Yeah. Transitioning out a little bit, continuing the company building theme for a sec. One of the things you at Atrium have done very well is think about content, marketing, brand. One of your self-admitted superpowers is that you're a gifted hype man. So what has been your philosophy of content marketing brand at Atrium?
Yeah, the philosophy of content marketing and branding, it's like cribbed directly from YC's playbook, right? If you are helpful to the founder community, the entrepreneurship community, and put information out there for free that is helpful to people, then they will like you and you will build a great brand in that community. It's not rocket science. And I didn't even invent it. I watched Paul run this playbook with things like Startup School and his essays for years. And that is what I liked doing myself when I was at YC, putting out content, whether it was on Snapchat or blog posts or whatever. I remember writing a guide to how to sell your company. After we sold Twitch, I was like, someone should have this information for founders because it's a very asymmetric process, right? Corporate development teams are doing tons of deals, and you as a founder might ever sell your company only once in your lifetime. And so I wrote this whole guide to how you should think about selling your company and put it up on Medium or whatever. And I remember seeing people be like, I used Justin's guide to sell my company. Yeah. And that was such a good feeling. And, we didn't economically make any, I didn't economically at YC get anything from that. But I know that by building goodwill in the world, people are like, oh, well, I would want him as an advisor or as an investor in, my next company. Right. And so, we felt the same playbook could work at Atrium. So writing guides for how to raise your seed round, how to raise your Series A from our own experiences, how to deal with various legal questions or issues that you might come up with. Putting that content out there, I think is great for building goodwill and brand in the market.
Totally. You've also co-written a bunch of stuff. I wrote my Money Crypto Tech Crypto post on Atrium. So you've helped people write great things as well. You mentioned Snap. What did you learn from being a daily Snap? I don't even know what you describe yourself. Snapstar? Snapstar to the stars. Yes. What are the lessons? I think, Anuj, that's how you guys got in touch?
That is. That's why I reached out to him to Snap.
Yeah. Amazing. What are the lessons you took from it? What was that experience like?
Yeah. So a little context for people is basically in 2016 and then a little in 2017, I was creating a lot of Snapchat content, mostly about entrepreneurship and being a founder. And that was a really fun process for me. It was mostly like to learn about Snapchat at first because I hadn't really done anything in the social side in a while. And I was, it was all the rage. I was a late adopter to it, to be honest. And so I was trying to figure it out. So I was just creating content out there and putting it out there. It was kind of a fun format, these short video clips where I was just talking about whatever subjects people would ask me, sometimes fundraising, sometimes like how to stay balanced while running a company and how to do management, how to basically how to hire your first employees. And I just create fun, short clip content about it. And well, one thing I learned is it's really there, for these social media stars, it is a content treadmill. Like, that's a lot of work. You think these people are just out there getting brand deals and enjoying their lives. They are on a grind, and you got to do it every day and create this content every day. Otherwise your audience starts disappearing. Snapchat, unfortunately, was not the best platform for influencers because discovery is very hard. And so if you want to build yourself up, I got to a certain point, which was pretty fun, actually. I was like getting recognized. I remember I was in UAE watching Formula One, like in Abu Dhabi, and I got recognized on the street. And then that same trip, I was in Singapore, I got recognized on the street there. And so there was a point where it did get, decently sized, but it stopped growing. And so I was very frustrated because I was like, how do I grow my audience? And Snapchat just like doesn't care. They were not invested in helping people kind of grow. And so that's where an Instagram came along and kind of like clobbered them on the influencer side, because I think they cared a lot more about like the influencer feedback. But this was like before Instagram stories. So I hit a wall, and then I gave up. I also started Atrium. I hit a wall and I started Atrium, and I was like, I have something more interesting to do now. Yeah.
But you were almost going hardcore Gary Vaynerchuk.
I guess so. I think that, I guess I was almost going hardcore Gary Vaynerchuk. I like to think I have my own style on it.
Of course.
I'm just kidding. Yeah.
Of course. It's interesting. I don't know if you know this, but I see I've always seen some parallels in my career and yours. You started with Justin TV, live streaming. A few years later, I started Rapt FM, which was live streaming rap battles.
Yep.
And you've put a lot of content out there and build a brand off that. I've started to do that. And I guess I'm continuing to do that. And I guess I'm wondering, should I keep doing that, or should I become more like you in that way? Or would you tell me, you know what, it worked for me, but it might not work for you, or it might not be what you want?
No, I think you have a great brand out there, and that's very helpful, to people. And I actually do think it depends on what you want to do, right? I think if investors though, they underweight brand. One of the things I think Andreessen did very well, and so did YC, was really invest in branding and marketing, content marketing, right? Putting content out there early on, in a time when VCs were like, why should we put out content? We're the gatekeepers, right? They weren't marketing at all. Turns out now everybody's marketing on Twitter or whatever, but I think it's very important to build up a brand. I usually, when I talk about investing, in startups anyways, I say there's three things that are very important. Can't remember if I put this out there before, but the three things, number one is really your brand platform, right? Like do you have some sort of unique deal flow because you have this unique platform? So it could be, YC, which is almost like the HBS of Silicon Valley. Or it could be like, the platform Andreessen's developed, where they have this brand as like, they provide all these services to you. They take in all the fees and they've rolled them into these networks of services to help you scale your company. Or it could be something like SaaStr, another investor I really respect, Jason Lemkin. He's built this brand all around being the SaaS guy, right? Turns out SaaS is hugely overvalued or valued by the market right now. So it's a good place to be in, right? The good right time at the right place at the right time. And so I think building that unique platform to get that proprietary deal flow is very important as an investor. That's one of the kind of core things that you have to do.
Yeah. And yeah, my goal is I'm interested in investing and incubating, and that there will be, times in my career where I'm doing one more or the other, but really things like what you've done or what Keith Roy has done or what other people have done in that vein.
Yeah.
So it'll definitely help.
Absolutely. I think it can't hurt.
Zooming out a little bit, and Anuj, I know you've helped Justin on the investing stuff. How would you describe your investing philosophy, your angel investing philosophy? Maybe Justin, you could start and Anuj could add on.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't necessarily think I'm that good of an investor.
Well, I remember you told me this at Elmira. You said, invest in your friends. I've lost all my money doing it, but if I did it in the beginning, I would have made a lot of money.
FOMO investor.
Well, yes, I invest in my friends. My friends are investing something, and I'll invest, just because if I don't and they're successful, the FOMO will literally kill me. I could have invested in many, many multi-decacorn companies if only I didn't listen to my intuition as much and just blindly invested in my friends. And I'm not really sure what the lesson is there. But yeah, I don't know. I think, honestly, I don't think I'm that good of an investor. I think I've been riding this massive bull market. I think most people here in Silicon Valley have been. I don't think they're as genius as we might think, either internally or externally. And I think people are very lucky to be in the right place at the right time. I do have some friends who I think are amazing investors. I think Sam Altman, right, for example, I think he's an amazing investor, but I don't believe that I have those,
And what makes Sam a great investor? what uniquely do you think he's?
Well, I think there's three things that go into being a good investor, right? That number one thing was like having that platform, right? Number two is actually doing analysis and trying to understand where the world is going to end up and being right about that, right? But I think there's a lot of work that people could do if they wanted, but they don't. And so, that work is like, for example, just a basic one is like when you are confronted with a product and like go start doing customer calls and seeing if the customers actually like it or not. A lot of people don't do that. I don't, I haven't done that as an angel investor very much. So just doing the work to understand, is this where the world's going or not? I think that's a really important thing, because usually you're investing in things where you're not a direct, well, not usually maybe, but for myself, I'm investing in a lot of things that I don't have like direct industry experience in. And so maybe I don't know what's going to happen. And the third thing I think is just the willingness to hustle, to chase down deals and make people take your money. Because a lot of these really good investments are made off cycle. Like a lot of VCs and angel investors just like hang their shingle and wait for people to come in and say, oh, I'm raising my Series A. And then you are the gatekeeper, you're evaluating or whatever. But I think that the best investors, they identify, hey, I want to invest in this company. I don't care if they're raising money. I'm just going to call this guy every day and be helpful until they take my money. I heard this story, actually. I don't even know where I heard it, but that Cotu got to lead the round at Snapchat at, whatever, $700 or $800 million round or whatever. Like the valuation was like 800 million or something like that, because one of the founders like basically flew Evan on his PJ, his private plane somewhere. And, that's a form of hustle. I mean, it's kind of an extravagant one, but like, just doing whatever it takes to figure out how to get the deal. Even if that person isn't raising money, that founder's not raising money, I think that's a underweighted, skill set.
I want to talk about a few people who've been very influential in your career and ask either something that you think makes them uniquely special or something that you've uniquely taken from them. So maybe we're just talking about Sam. Let's start with Sam. Sam's sort of interesting because he hasn't built $1 billion company before, and yet has this exceptional, investing track record and has been this sort of force in Silicon Valley. What do you to credit his superpower to? Because it's not sort of immediately obvious the way that it is for other people who've built.
Yeah, I think Sam has a tremendous well of confidence and a tremendous interest in new ideas. And I think those things kind of combine to make him very curious, pursuing like new companies and investing in new companies, ideas that are so big and so outside the box that, people in Silicon Valley, myself included, were like, huh? But it turns out that they can be amazing companies. He's found some tremendous companies that like he's expanded YC in such ways, like both in terms of companies, but also in terms of initiatives and nonprofits that, we would never have the ambition or even understanding of ideas to like think about, from sourcing things like Ginkgo Bioworks and Rigetti, the quantum computing company, all the way to, creating OpenAI. He's just like such a dynamic person who's interested in new ideas to such an extreme level. Paired up with that level of confidence has been really incredible to watch.
Crazy question. Do you think he or someone else in technology could be president in the next 20 years?
Fortunately, I don't think the demographics in the United States support electing somebody from tech. I don't think America wants a technocrat president. I think we got that in Obama, and people are dissatisfied. So, unfortunately, this is not a knock against Sam. I just don't think that that is where we are headed as a country.
Yeah. Where do you think YC goes in the future? Is HBS prominent? Does it just continue to expand and, the accelerators taking 1,000 companies, or are there more accelerators? Is there a Princeton to the YC? Because right now it's really just YC. Like, how do you think about?
I think YC expands both in breadth and depth. So by breadth, I mean more and more startups. I think the ambition is to fund more and more and more startups concurrently and in different ways. And then I think there's this depth of funding startups and helping startups throughout the life cycle. And this is coming from the outside. I'm not there anymore. I'm an LP in the fund a little bit, a small one. But outside of that, I don't know. So, you have to ask Michael. But, I think I see more and more stuff on the Series A program and the continuity program. And
it looks like they might verticalize the whole venture stack.
Exactly. Maybe there will be no need for venture investors ever.
How about Michael? I was just going to bring him up. What's something that makes him uniquely special or something you've uniquely taken from him?
Yeah. So Michael Seibel, CEO of YC, one of my closest friends, also a board member at Atrium. I think Michael is really the purest person I know in terms of really wanting to help startups and being kind of Mr. Startups. The way I put it is like when we were working together at YC, if all the companies failed after demo day, I felt like he would not feel that he wasted his time. The process of teaching companies really is its own reward for Michael, I think. And he'll spend like hours and hours and hours, he'll camp out at YC the week before demo day and be there till 3 a.m. every day to help startups prepare for the demo day pitch. He'll make himself available at all hours at any time for startups. And it's one of those things where, when you see a founder with the right market fit, right? The founder market fit, it's like almost like he would pay to do that job. That's the type of passion you really want to see in people. And I think he really has that. And so he's helped so many startups all the way from back when we were running Justin TV, helping Airbnb navigate their first couple of years to, more recently being the CEO of YC and then helping these hundreds and hundreds of startups in the same way. I think Michael has that very unique passion for startups, and that's really a superpower. He also will tell you without pulling punches, but not in a negative way, everything that you're doing wrong, and a lot of people struggle to give that really candid feedback.
Yeah. How about Paul Graham, but not the Paul Graham of 2005 or even 2009, but the Paul Graham of, say, 2016 on, like in the most recent era?
I mean, I think that Paul Graham, the thing that's been consistent that I really, one of the things I really admire is that he, is very principled. Like, I think he's an extremely principled person in terms of like he has these certain beliefs around, startups, for example, but even like, how things should run, right? And like how he wants to live his life all the way to startups, right? In the startups one, I can speak to that a little bit better. He believes in, how to start a startup and like that you need to focus on these few core things, talking to your customers, programming, iterating. And that's really formed the core of YC, right? It formed the core philosophy of YC, how you should start a startup. Actually, it's funny because I always believed that there's this one way to start a startup, right? Two guys hacking in a room and talking to customers and then going back and programming something. And it turns out, in my opinion now, that there's many different ways to start companies, right? You can like look at even something like Beats Audio, right? Like who would have guessed that a rapper and a music producer would start a $3 billion company that they entirely outsource their product for, of like, if you told that to like, that's completely the opposite of the YC way, right? But there's many ways to skin a cat is what I've learned. But what I like about PG is that he's always been like, this is my philosophy on it. And I've strongly held convictions. And I think that's a very principled thing.
Yeah. How about Alexis Ohanian?
I think Alexis is a great, if people say, if I think my superpower is like kind of the promotional side, I think Alexis is like much next level. He's a 10X. Alexis is very good at promoting things. He's always tirelessly. If you follow him on Twitter or Instagram, he's tirelessly promoting other startups, the founders that they Initialize invested in. He's very good at it, and I think that's pretty amazing. In a very selfless way, I think it's amazing.
How about Emmett, your co-founder at Twitch?
Emmett is very, very deeply analytical, and he's very deeply customer focused. Yeah. And I think that's amazing. Like, he is a very customer focused CEO, very product focused CEO. And I think he thinks deeply about product and customers and what customers really, really want in a way that most people in Silicon Valley don't. The pivot to Twitch, that's all Emmett, and it was all Emmett talking to customers and really identifying, hey, here are the core things that we gaming broadcasters want. And that company wouldn't exist. The company wouldn't have existed and wouldn't have pivoted in that way if it wasn't for his deep customer insights. And so I think he's like really, that's really one of the core superpowers when it comes to work,
Totally. What's something you've learned from Mark Andreessen?
Interestingly, I think that there's a lot of, Mark is like one of the smartest people I've ever met. I think there's a lot of parallels between Andreessen and Atrium, actually, and that's one of the reasons why he was interested in it. What I liked about it was like they set out to rethink the venture firm. And in order to do that, they kind of came up with really one core hypothesis, I would say, and this is from the outside, so you might have to ask him or maybe Ben, but like their core hypothesis, I believe, was that marketing actually matters. Like all of these guys were gatekeepers. They had the money, the venture funds, but they didn't like wanted to, they were like kind of, they were gatekeepers and they were like, well, people should find us. You should figure out a connection to us or whatever. And they were just like, marketing actually matters. We're going to market on, social media all the different things they did were forms of marketing, right? So it's everything from like writing blog posts and Ben's book. That's like a direct form of marketing to the way they said it's, some experience required, which is what they call like all the GPs are going to be operators or entrepreneurs. That's effectively a form of marketing. Now you could say it's a better strategy for actually advising companies. That might be, but the fact they talked about it so much is a form of marketing, right? And then there's like the networks, like we're going to help you with all these services that we've scaled, that scales, and we approach it like a company, but that's effectively a form of marketing, right? Because it might help the companies, that helps these like the companies tell each other and they tell other companies, I had a founder tell me before I raised money from Indreessen, and he was like, you have to raise money from Indreessen. Their networks are amazing. These, scalable services that they have. And so I think that their core hypothesis really was that venture can be a much different business if you actually invest in marketing. And that has borne out right now. 10 years later, they just, I think, hit their 10-year anniversary. They are one of the premier firms in Silicon Valley that they built very quickly. And I think that, that's something that I learned, from them. And I think that's something that is interesting that applies in many ways to Atrium.
Totally. I want to end on a few grab bag questions. Maybe we could start with, you've been in Silicon Valley for how long?
We started our first company in 2005 in Boston. Yeah.
So almost 15 years. How have you seen it evolve in the time that you've been here? And how do you expect it to evolve going forward? Will it continue to be the center of startups worldwide? Will that change?
Yeah. Well, let me say that the network effect is very strong. And I think that Silicon Valley will continue to be the center of startups for a long time to come. That being said, I think there's a bunch of things that this specific geographic area is doing like very poorly. You don't need me to tell you. I can read about it online, but everything from housing and infrastructure is very bad here. And so there's a lot of incentive for people to create parts of their companies elsewhere. So, at Alto, we just opened Denver as a back office, right? For, or HQ2 for all of these different functions that are kind of cost prohibitive to put in San Francisco. And that's a very common story here in Silicon Valley. So I think it's less and less becoming the obvious trade-off that this is the best place for you as a founder. However, I do believe that the network effect is strong enough that's going to propel it for a long time. I don't think there's going to be a Silicon Valley 2. I think it's that's just going to be spread around, the rest of the world. All these different companies are going to be spread around the rest of the world or the rest of the United States. In terms of how things have changed, the one thing that I think is really has strongly changed is that this industry has grown up and matured a lot. And so it has attracted a different profile of people, more people who are interested in developing their career. They're, graduating from school. They want a stable career, safe bet. They're coming to Silicon Valley and they're not just working at startups. They're working at Facebook and Google. That's not good or bad, but I do think that when I got here, there were a lot of people who were interested in working in technology because fuck it, it's something cool to do. They were interested in the technology for the technology's sake and they were interested in experimenting with it. And there's a little bit less of that feeling here now, which may be something lost. But I do think that there are other places where that kind of engagement, I guess, or attitude manifests itself. I think the crypto markets are one of them, and I think there will be others.
Are you long or short distributed teams?
I think that we have not yet seen, I talked about this with Jason on This Week in Startups. We have not yet seen the decacorn distributed companies. But I think we will. I think distributed is something that, we're just starting to get the technology to make it work really well, like good video conferencing, Slack, all this stuff is, kind of come up in the last 5 years. And so now we're going to start seeing the wave of startups that really executed remote really well and have become very successful with it. So we'll see. But yeah, I think it's coming.
Peter Thiel talks a lot about secrets. What's an important truth that very few people agree with you on?
Most people think about starting a company and they get the opportunity to start a company because they really want to solve a specific problem in the world or like bring a specific product or service to market. And they are like the line worker on that. They're either in like sales or engineering or product, and they just are really good at that thing. And the problem most founders have is flipping from that to being more of a manager and delegator, building a machine that builds a machine, right? I actually have the opposite problem. which is that we started Atrium. You know, I'd been successful before, had a lot of resources to start. So I actually started by delegating first and kind of building the company without having been like the line worker myself first on like product or engineering or sales or obviously like doing the legal work or anything like that. And so I guess my kind of core belief is that you can start a company this way, but I think it's like the jury's still out because Atrium's, you know, still a startup.
You know, we talked about how to evaluating talent in the context of execs, but I'm curious to talk more in the context of founders, especially discovering them before other people have discovered them. Because I've noticed a few times in your career, you've bet on people before other people have bet on them. You've incubated companies with them or you've invested with them and played a really close role. What's sort of the criteria or spark that you're looking for that encourages you to spend time with other people who haven't yet been stamped?
Yeah, I think there's two things that are really important. Number one is having a growth mindset. So it's people who are always learning. The people I've observed who are like the best, you know, the Brian Chesky's or Drew from Dropbox, these guys are always out there learning whatever's going to come down the pipeline and the next thing around the corner. And I was always impressed by that, that dedication, because it's hard to like always commit yourself to learning what's next. So growth mindset, I think, is really important. And the second thing is just the ability to run through walls, and like you're going to experience a ton of pain and struggle and problems when you're a founder. And there's some people who hit those things and they give up. Other people hit them and they get stronger. And so those people who hit those problems and get stronger, those are the people I want to invest in.
What spark did you see in Anuj? Because a lot of people are out there trying to break in and have a role similar to what Anuj has. What did you see in him, Justin?
Yeah. So Anuj, what I really liked is that he was very proactive about reaching out and saying, hey, here's why you should hire me. Here's the type of things I can help you with. And I think that kind of proactivity is really important. And so that's kind of why we started working together. And then after, what I've really appreciated is that he's dived into every project with like, I'm just going to figure out how to do this the best and like really figure it out, do research, have a comprehensive understanding, whether it's like, how do we do OKRs or how do you do a team meeting or, any of the kind of daily running a company thing, or even how do I investigate and evaluate angel investments? It's very comprehensive growth mindset. That's been really fun. I think that there's a ton of these types of roles out there. A lot of successful people looking to scale themselves through, chief of staff or someone to bounce ideas off of, a creative partner. They're not that hard to find, actually. I've had many friends reach out recently who are like, how do I find somebody who can, I can partner with in this way? And, if you look for them, they're there.
Yeah. And to close, perhaps, so there are a lot of people, who are listening to this who are founders, who are in the thick of it right now, who are in the grind and can sort of intellectually understand that it will all fade, but have trouble getting there emotionally. What advice or parting words might you leave them with?
Yeah, well, I mean, the actionable advice, I've been meditating 40 minutes a day every day for a little while now. And I definitely recommend, take some time to disconnect and to introspect. But my my parting words are just, everything that you think is important doesn't really matter. And that's not a scary thing. That's not a bad thing. It's not a negative thing. It's, you build up these castles for like in your mind about like, these are the things that are really going to create satisfaction for me. Whether it's bringing a product to market or having a successful company or executing something successfully or selling your company or whatever it is. And none of those things will ever build any lasting long-term happiness. And even if you accomplish them and you build some great reputation, and people listen to you on a podcast, it's going to fade eventually. And so the sooner you accept that, the happier you'll be. I wish someone had told me that 10 years ago.
Cool. Justin Kan, co-founder, CEO of Atrium. OnDeck and Token Daily are very happy customers of Atrium since the beginning. If you're a startup and you're not using Atrium, you need to start using Atrium. Any last plugs for Atrium in terms of what startups should be thinking about?
Just email us, hello@atrium.co, or there's, you can fill out the form on the website, and we are always on the lookout to help new startups.
This has been a great episode. Thank you for what you guys do for the community, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Please hit us up at villageglobal.vc/network catalyst.